Welcome to this panel discussion. We're going to talk about maximizing performance with Meta in an evolving advertising ecosystem. And it certainly is an evolving ecosystem. We are in the thick of some very real changes as a result of platform and regulatory changes happening in the marketplace, including the removal of IDFA, mobile identifier on iOS, and the coming deprecation of third-party cookies in Google Chrome. So all of this means that while the cost of achieving business outcomes has increased for brands, it's also gotten harder to measure campaign effectiveness and results. Let's put what's happening into context. What exactly is changing for marketers about the way that ads are targeted and measured on the internet and on Meta's platforms? What's driving the change, and what do they mean for advertisers?
People, I think, have grown more and more concerned about the way that data is being shared and used and stored on the internet. And that has created, movements, both regulatory of GDPR and CCPA, as well as the major ad platforms, the major OSs like Apple and Google, to think about ways that we can evolve so that we are a little more privacy conscious, more privacy sensitive. And I think that makes a lot of sense in general. The actual way that we do that is a matter of a fair bit of debate and question, and we can talk about that. But I think it's fair to absolutely acknowledge that consumers do want this industry to evolve how it uses data, and that the status quo probably isn't tenable, and that we should all sort of embrace that change as opposed to resist it. So the standards are going to evolve, right? The cookie was invented in the mid-90s and has been with us for a long time, and it's time to think about new approaches. That's going to create a whole bunch of change in terms of, the practices and the methodologies for running ads and measuring ads and so forth. And I think the best way that we can approach that is through sort of collaboration by, these companies coming together to figure out how we can evolve to become more privacy sensitive. And then through, sort of a lot of really, I hope, strong communication with our mutual customers about what is changing, what the implications are, what they can do to maximize performance given those changes, and so forth. But it's a journey, and it's probably a long one. I think you mentioned the deprecation of third-party cookies. That's not happening until 2023, the end, and that's by no means the end of the road. This is something that we'll be working through for probably the next 5 to 10 years to evolve these standards. But it's something that is really important, and we need to do to improve user trust.
Talk about your philosophy, how you see this exactly evolving, where you are able to maintain some of this targeting and attribution, but you're not violating consumer privacy.
Our view in general is that privacy enhancing technologies are probably the most promising set or approach for moving in the direction of a more privacy centric world that doesn't come as meaningfully at the cost of performance for particularly smaller businesses. Will it change things, and will there be a hit to performance? Probably, and we should be okay with that.
It's not fair for consumers to have their data floating all over the place and being used, and that's not fair. And I'm not saying that's exactly the situation we were in, and it certainly was not the case with Meta. But Meta was arguably the best at protecting people's data than anybody else. But I think that where we want to go is we want to move towards understanding, the customer journey, absolutely, but understanding it in a way that it's kept within that platform itself and is not necessarily shared across other places.
Privacy enhancing tech, that sort of reduces the trade-off cost of using less data, because it allows us to still measure and understand ads in ways that you can't if you just do simple things like aggregation and anonymization and randomization and so forth, which are brute force approaches to improving privacy.
Andrew, I'd love to hear from you. You oversee, like you said, a lot of direct response buyer clients. How are these changes affecting your clients, and what sort of world do you want to see evolve for the consumer, and that's going to be, beneficial to your clients?
Ultimately, consumers, it's sort of like Congress. People say that they dislike Congress as a whole, but they like their member of Congress. And I think it's like, people say, I dislike advertising as a whole, but they like personalized advertising. That's been proven over and over. And we all like to see advertising that's more relevant. So I think for the consumer, it's trying to figure out, as a consumer myself, what that means, because I like seeing personalized ads, making sure that it feels safe being on each platform. And I know that Facebook, Meta's taking a lot of steps to be able to do that. And as an advertiser standpoint, where does that come in? we want to be able to be given as much information as we can to make decisions about showing ads in a smart way to people and in a strategic way to people. And that's the kind of thing that I think as we've moved into some of the technical stuff that Meta has done, it's been really helpful. So we've gone from, kind of learning then about the data that we have. Now we have, different conversions that are coming under model data. We have things like, AEM that are coming in and helping us understand. So the more that we have, the better off that's going to be, and is going to allow us to respect people's privacy, to be able to ensure we're putting out ads that people trust, and be able to make sure that we're being effective with the dollars that our clients are giving us to spend.
Graham, talk about some of the things that Meta is doing and building. Like, what exactly are these privacy preserving technologies?
Sure.
And how accurate and how well are they able to reproduce the types of results that advertisers are used to? And what will advertisers have to maybe get used to giving up?
One of the most important things that we've put out in the last year or so is the conversions API. And this is basically, think of it as like a new piece of plumbing that allows an advertiser and Facebook to communicate when results are actually happening on their website that can be attributed to an ad. And this is really important because some of the previous plumbing that we've had is beginning to degrade. And so we've got to put sort of new plumbing in place. I want to be super clear that API is entirely still responsive to opt-outs and so forth. So if a consumer opts out of tracking in iOS on Facebook, we don't use that conversions API and associate data with their profile and so forth. So it's not a workaround, it's a new piece of plumbing.
Andrew, I'd love to hear, are you using these tools with your clients? Are they working? What sort of results are they able to drive, and what metrics are you able to see? And then what are you sort of giving up by embracing these more privacy enhancing tools?
Now it's a lot of conversations about, okay, we are using the conversions API, we're using AEM, we're using, a lot of these other tools, and we're also going to be using in parallel things like, the marketing efficiency ratio. We're going to be looking at an overall picture. And here's the way that data is shown to us as well within these windows. I think right now there's a big narrative. People say, things definitely have been harder because there is a lot of signal loss. But I think that people also feel that you ask them, how did your Facebook or how did your Meta ads do? And they're like, well, they didn't do as well. But then you look at the overall marketing picture and they had one of the best holiday seasons they've ever had, if not the best, which is awesome. So I think that it's just a matter of making sure that you're on the same page moving forward into it. I think that, it's complex, and a lot of being successful today in reference to being an advertiser, it necessitates that you slow down and make sure that these pieces are implemented, because they will help you over time. And you want to be sort of on that early adoption train to make sure that you're getting as much as you possibly can to be able to report back to the client and communicating that to them to be successful in the long term.
So Graham, I'd love to, have you talk a little bit about the future and what other products
Sure.
you have in the works to make this work for consumers and advertisers.
One example that I think will get real next year in 2022 is our private lift solution. So for a long time, we've had a product called Conversion Lift that just enables, sort of test versus control measurement of how much, what outcomes do the ads really drive in a, sort of scientific way to really understand incrementality. And that's been made harder when we don't have the data for some of our users. And not only does that mean we're missing some data, but it means that bias can be introduced, right? Maybe the people that opt out look a certain or have a certain set of attributes. And that means that what we would see if we just looked at the opt-in users isn't as accurate as we want it to be. So what Private Lift does is it tries to do that computing of test versus control, sort of outside of Facebook's servers, using this technology called multi-party computation, where encrypted data is sent by Facebook. Here are the impressions that we're seeing, and by the advertiser, here are the conversions that resulted. Let's match those together in a way that no one learns anything individually about a user, and then just send back the results. I don't need to know who converted. I don't need to know who saw an impression on either end. I just need to know, did the campaign work and where did it work? And we're hoping, that we're already in a beta on that right now, and we're hoping to really roll that out to many of our, if not most of our clients next year. And so I'm really excited about that as maybe the first example of privacy enhancing technologies that will really take shape in an actual product and allow us to do something that we've done for a long time, but in a more privacy conscious way.
You guys are investing so much in creating these privacy enhancing technologies, and at the same time, the regulatory and landscape and consumer sentiment continues to shift in this space. Do you foresee like needing to, tweak these, or what happens if, these solutions you've come up with to process data on, without leaving the server or without leaving the browser environment? Like, what happens if these are no longer kosher, so to speak?
Yeah.
Are we living in a world where you have to continue to adapt and change?
Yeah, yes, I think we are living in a world where we're going to continue to have to change. And I think Andrew's point around sort of patience and I think then the other buzzword I really care about is collaboration. I don't want to live in a world, honestly, where, sort of Meta solutions require a certain set of technologies and Google's another and Snap's and TikTok's a different and so forth. As an industry, I think it's important that we come together in forums like the W3C and the World Federation of Advertising and in places like that to sort of build the standards of the future that will replace things like cookies, so that we make it easier on our mutual customers to sort of operate. We don't, it really does need to be interoperable. But I think holding true to some sort of core principles around transparency, users deserve to understand how their data is being used, choice and consent, they deserve to tell us whether they're comfortable with how we're using data and to change it if they're not. And then generally, like, we should shift towards using less data, minimizing the amount of data, and using it in more anonymous ways wherever we possibly can. And I think those three principles, transparency, choice, and data minimization, kind of need to guide that collaboration. And I hope that, if we all lean into that we'll get to a much better place in the coming years. But there will be fits and starts, and there will be proposals made, and reactions to them that are not always uniformly positive. And that's okay. Like, it took time for the standards we have today to develop, and they were developed collaboratively. We're on the same journey now for the next phase.
Well, I think we're all used to just endless change in the world at the moment. So on that note, thank you both so much for this really insightful discussion.